The chamber had been designed to make beings feel small. I had known this before I arrived. I had read the architectural analyses, studied the historical documents, watched the recordings of 100 previous sessions. Knowing and experiencing were not the same thing. The ceiling rose so high that clouds formed near it. Real clouds. Weather patterns generated by the sheer volume of air trapped inside a hollowed moon that the Galactic Council had claimed as its seat of power 40,000 years ago. The walls were carved from the moon's original stone, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the tiered galleries back at themselves. Endless rows of seats, endless rows of delegates, endless rows of species who had been doing this for longer than humanity had written language. I stood at the central podium. Alone. My name is Kalen Vance. I am the ambassador of the Terran Confederacy. I have been in this role for 3 years, but I have been preparing for this moment for my entire life. The council chamber held representatives from 72 species. 72 different ways of looking at the galaxy. 72 different sets of interests, alliances, grievances, and ambitions. They filled the galleries in a cascade of forms, feathers and scales and chitin and fur and skin that shifted color with each passing thought. The air smelled of alien biochemistry, filtered and recirculated but still present, still foreign, still a reminder that I was a very long way from Earth. The presiding officer was called the Voice. It was not a title. It was a description. The being who held the role was a Veth of indeterminate age, its species having evolved to project sound across vast distances without technological assistance. When the Voice spoke, the entire chamber felt it in their bones. The Terran Confederacy, the Voice announced, has been called before this council to answer for violations of the Galactic Compact. The specific charges are as follows. A list appeared on the central display. I had seen it before. I had memorized it. 17 counts of unauthorized expansion. 23 counts of military buildup beyond sustainable treaty limits. 4 counts of interference in the internal affairs of sovereign species. 2 counts of what the Council's legal office had termed existential unpredictability. That last one was my favorite. Existential unpredictability. They had invented a new category of crime just for us. The Voice continued reading, but I stopped listening. I had read the charges. I had read the evidence. I had read the transcripts of the closed-door sessions where this had all been decided long before I ever set foot in this room. This was not a trial. This was a performance. The verdict had been written before I arrived. The sentence had been determined. The only question was whether I would play my assigned role, the frightened representative of a primitive species, begging for mercy, offering concessions, accepting terms. They expected me to kneel. Not literally. The council was too sophisticated for literal kneeling. They expected submission. They expected deference. They expected me to lower my gaze and speak softly and acknowledge that humanity had overstepped and promised to do better and accept whatever punishment they saw fit to impose. That was how the game worked. That was how it had always worked. A weaker species overreaches. The council calls them to account. The weaker species apologizes. The council grants leniency in exchange for compliance. Everyone goes home with their dignity mostly intact. Except humanity had not overreached. The expansion they called unauthorized had been approved by every local species we had encountered. The military buildup they called excessive was a fraction of what our neighbors maintained. The interference they claimed was simply us showing up when smaller species asked for help and no one else would answer. The charges were pretext. The trial was theater. The council wanted to remind humanity that no matter how far we had come, we were still newcomers. Still junior. Still expected to know our place. I looked up at the galleries. 72 species. Thousands of years of accumulated power. The weight of galactic civilization pressing down on one human standing alone at a podium. The Voice finished reading the charges. The chamber fell silent. The Terran Confederacy may now present its response. I took a breath. I had prepared a speech. 17 pages. Carefully worded. Legally precise. Full of citations and precedents and respectful language that would signal our willingness to work within the system. I had memorized that speech. I had practiced it for weeks. I had delivered it in front of mirrors and recording devices and advisors who told me it was perfect. I did not deliver it. Because in that moment, standing in that room, looking at those 72 species and their 72 sets of expectations, I realized something important. The speech would not change anything. The citations would not change anything. The precedents would not change anything. They had already decided. They had already judged. They had already written the script, and in their script, humanity was supposed to apologize. I was tired of apologizing. The Terran Confederacy, I said, has heard the charges presented by this council. I paused. The chamber was very quiet. The clouds drifted across the distant ceiling. The mirrored walls reflected my own small figure back at me from 1,000 angles. I had 3 words left. Not the ones I had prepared. Not the ones they expected. We do not kneel. The silence that followed was not the silence of waiting. It was the silence of systems crashing. The silence of assumptions breaking. The silence of 72 species trying to process a sentence that did not fit into any of their procedural frameworks. The voice did not speak for a long time. When it finally did, its voice had lost its ceremonial resonance. I beg your pardon. I looked up at the galleries. I looked at the delegates who had come to watch a primitive species learn its place. I looked at the beings who had decided, without ever meeting a human, that we were too young, too reckless, too dangerous to be trusted with our own destiny. You heard me, I said. We do not kneel. Not to you. Not to anyone. Not now. Not ever. I set my prepared speech on the podium. I did not need it anymore. We came here today expecting a fair hearing. We did not receive one. The verdict was written before we arrived. The sentence was determined behind closed doors. This is not justice. This is theater. And the Terran Confederacy does not participate in theater that demeans our species or compromises our principles. A Keth delegate rose from his seat. His membrane shifted through a rapid sequence of colors I had learned to read as extreme distress. This is unprecedented, he said. This is a violation of Council protocol. The ambassador must be. Must be what? I interrupted. Silenced. Removed. Punished for refusing to submit. I looked at him. We have been watching this council for 40 years. We have seen how you treat species who bow. We have seen how you grant them small concessions while taking everything that matters. We have seen how you smile at their representatives and pat their chairs and call them junior partners while you dismantle their autonomy piece by piece. I turned to face the full chamber. We are not here to be your junior partners. We are not here to accept your permission to exist. We are here because we were invited. We are here because we believed this council could be a forum for genuine cooperation between equal species. If we were wrong about that, tell us now. Tell us clearly. Tell us so that every species in this chamber understands exactly what this council truly is. The silence returned. Deeper this time. The kind of silence that precedes either collapse or transformation. The voice spoke. Its voice was quiet now. No longer projecting. No longer performing. Ambassador Vance. What is it you want? I looked up at the clouds drifting across the distant ceiling. I thought about Earth. About the blue sky and the green hills and the people who had sent me here, people who trusted me to speak for them, who believed that words could be weapons, who had learned over thousands of years that the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to be small. I want this council to hear us. Really hear us. Not as a junior species to be managed. Not as a problem to be solved. As equals. As partners. As a species that has earned its place among the stars not by conquest or submission, but by sheer, stubborn, relentless refusal to give up. I paused. If this council cannot do that, then the Terran Confederacy will withdraw its application for full membership. We will return to our worlds. We will continue to grow. We will continue to explore. We will continue to make friends and build alliances with species who see us as we are, not as a threat, not as a pawn, but as neighbors. The choice is yours. But understand this. Whatever you decide, humanity will not kneel. We have not knelt in 10,000 years of history. We will not start today. I stepped back from the podium. I did not bow. I did not lower my gaze. I stood straight, feet planted, hands at my sides, and I waited. The chamber had no script for this. No procedural rule. No historical precedent. For the first time in 40,000 years, the Galactic Council did not know what to do next. And somewhere in the galleries, in a seat near the back where the newer species sat, a delegate began to laugh. Not mockingly. Not nervously. With something that sounded like hope. The laughter spread. Not through the entire chamber, not yet, but through sections of the galleries where the newer species sat. The ones who had been admitted in the last century. The ones who still remembered what it felt like to stand at that podium and be told to kneel. The Keth delegate's membrane cycled through colors so rapidly that it looked like a distress beacon. The voice raised a hand for silence, but for once, the chamber did not immediately comply. I stood at the podium. I did not move. I had said what I came to say. Now I would wait for their response. It came from an unexpected direction. The Orisai delegate, an ancient being whose living quartz seat had been in the chamber for longer than most species had existed, rose slowly. Her form was difficult for human eyes to parse, crystalline structures shifting with each breath, light refracting through internal facets in patterns that conveyed meaning. I had learned to read those patterns through months of study. What I saw now was something I had never witnessed in an Orisai before. Uncertainty. "Ambassador Vance," she said. Her voice was slow, deliberate, each word placed with the care of someone handling fragile goods. "You speak of equality. You demand to be heard as an equal partner. Yet your species has been a member of this community for less than one standard generation. You have not paid the price of admission that every other species has paid. You have not served the apprenticeship. You have not demonstrated." "Demonstrated what?" I asked. "Patience. We have been patient for 40 years while your committees reviewed our applications. Humility. We have been humble while your diplomats explained our own needs to us as if we were children. Compliance. We have complied with every treaty, every regulation, every request this council has ever made of us. We have done everything you asked. And still, you tell us we have not demonstrated enough." I paused. The Orisai delegate's crystalline structure shifted through a sequence I did not recognize. I wished, briefly, that I had studied longer. "You speak of an apprenticeship. You speak of a price of admission. What was the price for the Keth? What wars did they fight? What species did they subjugate? What worlds did they burn to earn their place at this table?" I looked at the Keth advocate. His membrane had gone still. "I have read the history. I know what the Keth did in their first century of expansion. I know what the Orisai did. I know what every founding member of this council did to secure their position. Do not tell me about prices. Do not lecture me about apprenticeships. You did not earn your seats through patience and humility. You earned them through power. And now that another species has power, you call it a threat." The Orisai delegate did not sit down. But she did not speak again. Her crystals settled into a pattern I had learned to recognize as reconsideration, rare among her species, rarer still in public. The voice intervened. "Ambassador Vance, your words border on accusation. This council has operated under the same procedural framework for 40,000 years. It has admitted over 70 species. It has maintained galactic stability through—" "Through what?" I said. "Through the systematic exclusion of anyone who might challenge your authority? Through treaties written to benefit the powerful at the expense of the weak? Through a legal code so complex that only species with centuries of experience can navigate it?" I gestured to the galleries. "Look at who sits in the front rows. Look at who sits in the back. Look at the seats that are bolted to the floor and the ones that are temporary. Look at the delegates who speak and the ones who are told to wait. This council is not a forum for equals. It is a hierarchy. And every species here knows exactly where they stand." I turned to face the newer species. The ones in the temporary seats. The ones who had been told to wait, to learn, to demonstrate, to prove themselves worthy of being heard. "You have been waiting for centuries. Some of you for millennia. You have been told that your time will come, that your voices will matter, that if you just follow the rules and pay your dues and do not make trouble, you will eventually be accepted as equals." I paused. "It will not happen. They will never accept you as equals. Because equality is not something they can grant. It is something you must claim. The chamber erupted. Delegates rose from their seats across every tier. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages, translation earpieces struggling to keep pace. The voice called for order. The call was ignored. In the chaos, I saw something interesting. The newer species, the ones in the temporary seats, were not shouting. They were watching, listening, looking at each other across the galleries in ways I had not seen before. There was communication happening there, silent and rapid, that had nothing to do with the Council's official channels. I had done what I came to do. Not deliver a speech. Not make an argument. Crack the chamber open. Show the newer species that their patience was not virtue. It was a cage. And the door had never been locked. They had just never tried to open it. The voice finally restored order through a method I had not seen before, a low-frequency pulse that vibrated through the floor and caused several delegates to clutch their heads. When the chamber was quiet again, the voice looked at me with something I could not read. Not anger. Not respect. Something else. Ambassador Vance. The Council will recess for 1 standard hour. When we return, you will be expected to present your formal response to the charges. I strongly advise you to use that time to reconsider your approach. I do not need an hour, I said. I have already given you my response. There are procedures. I am aware of your procedures. I am also aware that procedures can be changed. That is what I am proposing. Not a defense against your charges. A fundamental reconsideration of how this council operates. If you are not willing to have that conversation, then end this session now. Expel me. Declare humanity an enemy. Do whatever you feel you must. But do not waste my time with procedural delays while you decide how to punish me for telling the truth. The voice was silent for a long moment. Then, to the shock of everyone in the chamber, it nodded. The council will recess. Ambassador Vance, you will remain available for consultation. I suggest you use the time to prepare for the afternoon session. It was not a victory. It was not even a concession. But it was something. The voice had not dismissed me. Had not ordered me removed. Had not declared my words out of order. The chamber had heard what I said, and now they needed time to decide what to do about it. I stepped back from the podium. I did not bow. I walked to the side of the chamber where a small alcove had been designated for human delegation use. My hands were shaking. I had not noticed until now. I sat down. I closed my eyes. I breathed. Somewhere in the galleries, a delegate from a younger species was making eye contact with another delegate from another younger species. They did not speak. They did not need to. Something had shifted. The furniture was noticing that it had legs. And the chamber would never be the same. The recess lasted 2 hours. I spent most of them alone in the alcove, drinking water that tasted faintly of recycled station air and watching the chamber empty and refill. Delegates gathered in clusters across the galleries, speaking in tones too low for my earpiece to catch. The newer species huddled together in ways I had not seen before, cross-species groups that had not existed an hour ago. They were talking to each other. Not through the Council's formal channels. Not through their protocol handlers. Directly. Delegate to delegate. Species to species. Something was spreading through the chamber. I could feel it. Like pressure building before a storm. A Keth aide approached my alcove. Young, by Keth standards, his membrane holding a steady pale blue I had learned to associate with formal messages. The Keth Dominion requests a private consultation with the Terran ambassador during the recess. I looked at him. Tell your delegate that I am available to speak with any species that wishes to speak with me. I will not meet privately with one while excluding others. If the Keth have something to say, they can say it where everyone can hear. The aide's membrane flickered through a sequence I did not have time to parse. He left. 2 minutes later, a message arrived on my data tablet. Not from the Keth. From the Veth. From a delegate I had never spoken to before. The younger species are convening in Subchamber 12. They request your presence. I stood up. I walked through the corridors of the hollowed moon, past the polished stone walls and the mirrored surfaces and the ancient seals of species that had held power here for millennia. Subchamber 12 was small, designed for administrative meetings, not plenary sessions. It was full. 37 species. Every one of them admitted within the last 500 years. Every one of them assigned to the back galleries, the temporary seats, the Tier 3 and Tier 4 participation categories. Every one of them tired of waiting. They had brought their own chairs. Folding chairs. Temporary installations. Chairs that had arrived late, shipped in crates, labeled supplementary furnishing. I recognized the pattern because I had lived it. A delegate from the Tellus Concord, a species I had met briefly during my first week on the station, stepped forward. Ambassador Vance, we have been discussing your words in the main chamber. I hoped you would. Some of us believe you have gone too far. That you have endangered not only your own species but all newer species by challenging the Council so directly. She paused. Others believe you are the first person to say aloud what we have all been thinking for centuries. And what do you believe? She looked around the room. At the 37 species gathered in the small subchamber. At the folding chairs and the temporary installations and the delegates who had been told to wait, to learn, to prove themselves. I believe that we have a choice. We can continue to wait for the Council to grant us what we will never voluntarily give. Or we can claim it for ourselves. A murmur passed through the room. Not disagreement. Recognition. What are you proposing? I asked. She looked at me. You said equality is not something they can grant. It is something we must claim. How do we claim it? I thought about the question. I had been preparing for this moment my entire life, but I had not expected it to arrive so quickly. I had thought there would be more time, more negotiation, more procedural steps. But the chamber had cracked open faster than I anticipated, and now I had to decide what to do with the opening. We vote together, I said. Every newer species in this council. We coordinate our votes on every issue, not as separate delegations pursuing separate interests. As a bloc. As a united front. A voting bloc, the Tellus delegate said. The Council has no rule against voting blocs. The Council has no rule against them because no one has ever tried to form one across so many species. They assumed we would never trust each other enough. Can we trust each other enough? I looked around the room. At the 37 species who had been told they were not ready, not worthy, not old enough. At the beings who had spent centuries watching the powerful make decisions that affected their worlds without ever being consulted. I trust that we share a common interest, I said. The Council will never reform itself voluntarily. The powerful do not give up power. They have to be convinced that holding on to it costs more than letting it go. A unified voting bloc of 37 species is not something they can ignore. It is not something they can dismiss. It is not something they can punish without punishing half the Council. The room was very quiet. I could hear the station's environmental systems humming through the walls. The filtered air. The distant vibration of ancient machinery. The question is not whether we can trust each other. The question is whether we can afford not to. A delegate from the Veth, small, soft-furred, with eyes that had seen too much, spoke for the first time. The founding species will not accept this. They will see it as a coup, a rebellion. They will try to crush it. Let them try, I said. What will they do? Sanction us? They need our trade. Expel us? They need our votes. Declare war on 37 species at once. I shook my head. They are powerful, but they are not stupid. They will rage. They will threaten. They will do everything they can to divide us. And then, when they realize we will not break, they will negotiate. And you believe this? I believe that 40,000 years of stability has made the founding species comfortable. Comfortable species do not want chaos. They do not want conflict. They want the system to continue functioning the way it always has. A voting bloc of 37 species does not break the system. It just changes who gets to sit at the table. Another silence. Then, one by one, the delegates nodded. Not all of them. Not yet. But enough. The Tellus delegate looked at me. What do we call ourselves? I had not prepared an answer for this. The words came anyway. The Coalition of the Unbroken. She smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. Then let us be unbroken. We returned to the main chamber together. Not in a formal procession. Not in a coordinated march. Just 37 species walking through the same corridors at the same time, heading toward the same seats, carrying the same understanding. The voice called the session back to order. The galleries filled. The founding species took their thrones, the dark matter seats, the frozen smoke, the living quartz. And then they noticed. The newer species were not scattered across the back rows anymore. They were sitting together. Clustered. Deliberately. 7 rows of temporary seats, now arranged like a voting block. Like a coalition. Like a promise. I walked to the podium. The chamber went quiet. The Terran Confederacy is prepared to present its formal response to the charges, I said. The voice nodded. Proceed. I looked at the galleries. At the founding species in their thrones. At the Coalition of the Unbroken in their temporary seats. At the delegates who had spent centuries waiting for someone to give them permission to speak. The Terran Confederacy denies all charges. We deny them not because we are innocent of every action described in the Council's filing, but because the framework under which those actions have been judged is itself illegitimate. A system that excludes the voices of 37 species from meaningful participation in their own governance is not a justice system. It is a hierarchy. And the Terran Confederacy does not recognize the authority of any hierarchy that refuses to hear the people it claims to serve. The voice did not interrupt. The chamber held its breath. We therefore request, not as a concession, not as a plea, but as a demand, that this council conduct a full review of its membership structure. That it establish a commission with equal representation from founding and newer species. That it produce, within 1 standard year, a proposal for restructuring that guarantees every member species an equal voice in the governance of this body. I paused. If this council refuses to undertake such a review, the Terran Confederacy will withdraw from these proceedings. We will not participate in a trial conducted under rules we had no part in making. We will not submit to judgment by a court that does not consider us equal. We will not kneel. I stepped back from the podium. The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the environmental systems seemed to have stopped. The voice looked at me for a long time. Then it looked at the Coalition of the Unbroken, 37 species sitting together in temporary chairs, waiting to see what would happen next. The Council will take the ambassador's request under advisement, the voice said. Session is adjourned. The gavel struck. The session ended. But nothing else ended. The coalition remained in their seats. The founding species remained in theirs. The chamber held its shape, but the shape had changed. I walked back to my alcove. My hands were steady now. The work had just begun. The adjournment lasted 3 days. Not because the council needed time to deliberate. Because the founding species needed time to panic. I spent those 3 days in Subchamber 12. The coalition had claimed it as our meeting space. 37 species, each sending their senior delegates, each bringing their own chairs, their own data tablets, their own histories of waiting. The room was too small. We did not care. On the first day, we established our rules. No species had veto power. Every delegate spoke for their own people. Decisions were made by consensus, not majority. It was slower than the Council's method. It was also fairer. No one had ever shown the newer species a system that worked for them. So we built our own. On the second day, the threats began. A Keth aide arrived with a formal notice. The Keth Dominion would reconsider its trade agreements with any species that participated in coordinated opposition to Council authority. I read the notice aloud to the coalition. Then I set it on the table and asked if anyone wanted to leave. No one moved. An Orisai envoy arrived with a different message. More subtle. The Orisai continuum had long supported the development of emerging species. They were concerned that the coalition's approach might be counterproductively confrontational. They suggested a more gradual path to reform. One that would take only a few centuries. I thanked the envoy for their concern. I did not promise anything. A Fanny mediator arrived with no message at all. She simply sat in the back of the room, listening, taking notes, leaving quietly. Her fins made a pattern I had catalogued as observation without participation. She did not return. But her notes, I later learned, were read by every founding species within hours. On the third day, the voice requested a private meeting. I went alone. The voice's office was in the oldest part of the station, where the walls were not polished stone but raw rock, untouched since the moon had been hollowed 40,000 years ago. The voice sat behind a desk that was not a desk, some kind of organic growth, shaped over centuries to fit the contours of its body. I stood. It did not offer me a seat. "Ambassador Vance," the voice said, "you have created a crisis." "No," I said. "I have revealed one. The crisis was already here. You just did not want to see it." The voice's bioluminescence flickered. Anger, I thought. Or frustration. It was hard to read a species I had not studied. The founding species built this council. We created the framework that has maintained galactic stability for 40 millennia. We have admitted new species. We have granted them representation. You have granted them seats in the back of the chamber. You have granted them voting rights that mean nothing because their votes are always outnumbered. You have granted them the right to speak, but only after you have already decided what will be said. I paused. You have given them everything except what matters. A voice that is actually heard. The voice was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its tone had changed. Less formal. Less performative. "What do you want, Ambassador?" "Truly. I want what I said in the chamber. A commission. Equal representation. A full review of the council structure. 1 year to produce a proposal for reform. And if the council refuses, then the coalition will continue to vote together. On every issue. For as long as it takes. We will not disrupt the council's function. We will simply make it impossible for the founding species to ignore us." The voice's bioluminescence shifted again. Something softer. Something I had not seen before. "You understand that the founding species will fight this. Not all of them. Some are already questioning the old ways. But enough will resist. Enough that the next several months will be difficult." The adjournment lasted 3 days. Not because the council needed time to deliberate. Because the founding species needed time to panic. I spent those 3 days in Subchamber 12. The coalition had claimed it as our meeting space. 37 species, each sending their senior delegates, each bringing their own chairs, their own data tablets, their own histories of waiting. The room was too small. We did not care. On the first day, we established our rules. No species had veto power. Every delegate spoke for their own people. Decisions were made by consensus, not majority. It was slower than the council's method. It was also fairer. No one had ever shown the newer species a system that worked for them. So we built our own. On the second day, the threats began. A Keth aide arrived with a formal notice. The Keth Dominion would reconsider its trade agreements with any species that participated in coordinated opposition to council authority. I read the notice aloud to the coalition. Then I set it on the table and asked if anyone wanted to leave. No one moved. An Orisai envoy arrived with a different message. More subtle. The Orisai Continuum had long supported the development of emerging species. They were concerned that the coalition's approach might be counterproductively confrontational. They suggested a more gradual path to reform. One that would take only a few centuries. I thanked the envoy for their concern. I did not promise anything. A Fanny mediator arrived with no message at all. She simply sat in the back of the room, listening, taking notes, leaving quietly. Her fins made a pattern I had catalogued as observation without participation. She did not return. But her notes, I later learned, were read by every founding species within hours. On the third day, the voice requested a private meeting. I went alone. The voice's office was in the oldest part of the station, where the walls were not polished stone but raw rock, untouched since the moon had been hollowed 40,000 years ago. The voice sat behind a desk that was not a desk, some kind of organic growth, shaped over centuries to fit the contours of its body. I stood. It did not offer me a seat. "Ambassador Vance," the voice said, "you have created a crisis." "No," I said. "I have revealed one. The crisis was already here. You just did not want to see it." The voice's bioluminescence flickered. Anger, I thought. Or frustration. It was hard to read a species I had not studied. The founding species built this council. We created the framework that has maintained galactic stability for 40 millennia. We have admitted new species. We have granted them representation. You have granted them seats in the back of the chamber. You have granted them voting rights that mean nothing because their votes are always outnumbered. You have granted them the right to speak, but only after you have already decided what will be said. I paused. You have given them everything except what matters. A voice that is actually heard. The voice was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its tone had changed. Less formal. Less performative. "What do you want, Ambassador?" "Truly. I want what I said in the chamber. A commission. Equal representation. A full review of the council's structure. 1 year to produce a proposal for reform. And if the council refuses, then the coalition will continue to vote together. On every issue. For as long as it takes. We will not disrupt the council's function. We will simply make it impossible for the founding species to ignore us." The voice's bioluminescence shifted again. Something softer. Something I had not seen before. "You understand that the founding species will fight this. Not all of them. Some are already questioning the old ways. But enough will resist. Enough that the next several months will be difficult." "I understand. And you are willing to endure that difficulty? Your species is young. Your position in the galaxy is still fragile. If the founding species coordinate their opposition, they could cause significant harm to your interests." "I know." The voice looked at me. "Then you are either very brave or very foolish." "Perhaps both," I said. "Perhaps that is what it takes to change something that has not changed in 40,000 years." The voice did not respond. I turned and walked out of its office. The session resumed on the 4th day. The chamber was full. Every seat occupied. The founding species in their thrones. The coalition in their temporary chairs. The galleries packed with delegates who had come to watch history. The voice called the session to order. The first item on the agenda was the Terran Confederacy's request for a structural review commission. The Keth delegate rose. His membrane was the dark gray of formal objection. The Keth Dominion opposes this request. The Council's procedures have served galactic stability for 40 millennia. They do not require revision based on the demands of a species that has been a member for less than a single generation. He sat down. The Orisai delegate rose. Her crystals shifted through patterns of measured concern. The Orisai continuum shares the Keth Dominion's reservations. However, we acknowledge that the current moment presents unique challenges. We propose a compromise. A committee to study the feasibility of a structural review. To report back in 50 standard years. 50 years. Another delay. Another way of saying, not now, not ever. I rose from my seat. The chamber turned to look at me. Not at the podium this time. From my seat among the coalition. The Terran Confederacy thanks the Orisai delegate for their proposal. We decline it. 50 years is not a compromise. It is a dismissal. The coalition requests a vote on the original proposal. A commission with equal representation. Reporting back in 1 year. The voice called for a vote. The chamber systems tallied the results. The founding species voted no. The coalition voted yes. The outcome depended on the species in the middle, the older but not founding, the powerful but not dominant, the ones who had been waiting for someone else to make the first move. The vote was tied. For the first time in 40,000 years, the Galactic Council had failed to reach a decision. The voice looked at the results. Then it looked at me. The Council is deadlocked. The matter will be referred to a special committee. The committee will consist of equal representation from founding species and non-founding species. It will report back in 30 standard days. 30 days. Not 50 years. Not a dismissal. A real timeline. A real commitment. I looked at the coalition. They were staring at me with expressions I could not read across so many species. But I did not need to read their expressions. I could see it in the way they sat. Straightened. Ready. The furniture had not only noticed that it had legs. It had learned to walk. 30 days. That was how long the Special Committee had to produce a proposal that would reshape the Galactic Council. 30 days to do what had not been done in 40,000 years. 30 days to decide whether the older species would share power or watch the younger species take it. I spent those days in 2 places. The committee chamber, where representatives from 12 species, 6 founding, 6 non-founding, argued over every word, every clause, every procedural comma. And Subchamber 12, where the coalition met every evening to review the day's progress and prepare for the next. The negotiations were brutal. The founding species did not want to give up anything. The Keth delegate walked out 3 times. The Orosai delegate threatened to dissolve the committee twice. The Thani mediator, who had been assigned to facilitate, developed a tic in her fins that she could not control. But the coalition held. 37 species. 37 voices. 37 folding chairs in a room too small for all of them. We did not break. We did not yield. We did not kneel. On the 28th day, the committee reached an agreement. The proposal was not everything we wanted. The founding species had fought too hard for that. But it was enough. A new tier of membership with equal voting rights for all species admitted in the last millennium. A rotating council presidency that would give every species a turn at leadership. A charter amendment process that did not require unanimous founding member approval. And most importantly, a standing rule that any species could request a structural review. No waiting. No permission. No centuries-long apprenticeship. I read the proposal 3 times. Then I brought it to Subchamber 12. The coalition read it in silence. 37 species, 37 ways of processing text, 37 sets of emotions that I could only partially read. The silence stretched. The Tellus delegate spoke first. It is not enough. It is a beginning, I said. A beginning that took 40,000 years to arrive. How long will the rest take? I looked around the room. At the delegates who had been told to wait. Who had been told to be patient. Who had been told that their time would come if they just followed the rules and did not make trouble. I do not know, I said. None of us know. But I know this. The Council has never offered anything like this before. They have never agreed to share power. They have never admitted that the system needs to change. Today they did both. Not because they wanted to. Because we made them. I paused. This is not the end. This is not victory. This is the door opening. What we do on the other side of it is up to us. The Veth delegate, small, soft-furred, with eyes that had seen too much, stood up. The Veth Concord accepts the proposal. One by one, the others followed. The Tellus. The Orosai delegation's non-founding members. The younger species who had been waiting for centuries to be heard. 37 affirmations. 37 seats in a room too small. 37 species choosing to move forward together. I sent the coalition's acceptance to the committee. The founding species ratified it the next day. The full council voted on the final day of the deadline. The vote was not unanimous. The Keth Dominion voted no. 3 other founding species joined them. But the rest voted yes. Enough to pass. Enough to change. The chamber was silent after the results were displayed. Not the silence of shock. The silence of something settling into place. Something new. Something that had been built, not by one species, but by 37. By delegates in temporary chairs who had refused to wait any longer. The voice closed the session. Delegates filed out. The founding species retreated to their enclaves to process what had just happened. The coalition remained. I stood in the center of Subchamber 12, surrounded by folding chairs and tired delegates and the quiet hum of a station that was older than my entire civilization. We did it, someone said. No, I said. We started it. The work is just beginning. The Tellus delegate smiled. You are impossible to please, Ambassador. I am easy to please, I said. I just do not confuse progress with completion. She laughed. It was a tired laugh, but a real one. What comes next? I looked around the room. At the delegates who had found each other across the divide of species and distance and millennia of mistrust. At the coalition that had been born in a crisis and would have to learn how to survive in peace. We go home, I said. We report to our governments. We build alliances. We watch the council to make sure it keeps its promises. And when the next species is admitted to this body, the next one to be given a folding chair and a dock number for waste disposal, we make sure they know they are not alone. And after that, I thought about Earth, about the blue sky and the green hills and the people who had sent me here, about the 3 words that had cracked the chamber open, about the 37 species who had decided, in a small subchamber full of temporary chairs, that they would rather stand together than kneel alone. After that, I said, we keep going. I left the station the next morning. My ship was small and quiet. My seat was bolted to the floor. Not because the council had provided it. Because I had requested it. A reminder. The coalition's delegates lined the observation deck as I departed. Not in formation. Not in ceremony. Just 37 beings standing together, watching a human ship leave the hollowed moon that had been their prison and was now, perhaps, becoming something else. The Tellus delegate sent a message as I cleared the dock. You will return, I replied, when you need me. Her response came back immediately. We will always need you. I looked at the words for a long time. Then I wrote back, you do not need me. You need each other. You have each other. She did not reply. I did not expect her to. The ship jumped to fold space. The station vanished behind me. The stars stretched into lines of light. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. I thought about the voice's question. What do you want, truly? I had not answered it honestly in the moment. Perhaps I had not known the answer. I knew it now. I wanted a galaxy where no species had to beg for the right to be heard. Where no delegate sat in a temporary chair, waiting for permission to speak. Where no child grew up on a world that was considered too young to matter. I wanted the coalition to outlast me. To outlast all of us. To become something permanent. Something that did not need a human ambassador to hold it together. That was the work. Not the proposal. Not the vote. Not the committee meetings and the procedural arguments. The work was building a future that did not depend on any one person. Any one species. Any one moment. I opened my eyes. The stars were steady now, the ship having settled into its transit rhythm. Somewhere behind me, the station was receding. Somewhere ahead, Earth was waiting. And somewhere in between, 37 species were learning that they did not need to kneel. They never had. They only needed to stand together. I smiled. The ship hummed. The stars held their light. And I went home. 1 year after the vote, I returned to the station. Not as a supplicant. Not as a petitioner. As an observer. The coalition had asked me to attend the first session of the reconfigured council. I had agreed, but I had made one thing clear. I would not speak. This was their moment. They had earned it. The chamber looked different. The physical structure had not changed. The clouds still drifted near the ceiling. The starlight still filtered through the thinned moonrock. The mirrored walls still reflected the galleries back at themselves. But the seating had been rearranged. No more back rows. No more temporary chairs. Every delegation sat at the same level, equidistant from the center. The founding species had kept their thrones. Old habits die slowly, but the thrones were now interspersed with the seats of newer species. Keth beside Tellus. Orisai beside Veth. A visual reminder that the old hierarchy had been replaced by something else. Something not yet stable, but no longer static. The Tellus delegate, my friend, my ally, my occasional exasperation, presided. The coalition had elected her as the first rotating president. She had accepted with the same quiet determination she had shown in Subchamber 12, when we were all still afraid to hope. She called the session to order. The voice, relegated to its role as ceremonial facilitator, announced the first agenda item. The chamber proceeded. I sat in the uppermost gallery, alone. The council had offered me a seat on the floor. I had declined. I was not here to participate. I was here to witness. And to remember. The first item was a bill submitted by the Veth Concord, concerning environmental protections for a cluster of pre-industrial worlds. It was the kind of bill that would have been buried in committee for decades under the old system. Today, it moved to a vote within 2 hours. It passed unanimously. Not because it was perfect, no bill is, but because the species whose worlds would be affected had been consulted. Their delegates had spoken. Their voices had been heard. That was the difference. Not the structure. Not the rules. The listening. I watched the session unfold. Delegates argued. Delegates compromised. Delegates amended and revised and voted. It was not harmonious. It was not peaceful. It was political, in the best sense of the word, beings with different interests finding ways to coexist without coercion. The founding species were learning to share power. The newer species were learning to wield it. Neither process was easy. Neither process was complete. But both were underway. After the session, I walked through the corridors. The station hummed the same hum. The filtered air smelled the same. But the people moving through the halls were different. Straighter. More confident. Delegates who had once kept their eyes down now met each other's gazes. Protocol handlers who had once dismissed newer species now waited their turn. I passed subchamber 12. It was empty now. The coalition had moved to larger quarters, but I paused at the doorway. I could still see the folding chairs, the crowded tables, the delegates who had come together in fear and left in hope. That room had not changed, but the beings who had met in it had changed everything. A young delegate approached me. I did not recognize her species. She had been admitted less than a year ago. Her chair was still new, still unfaded, still waiting for the wear marks that come with use. "Ambassador Vance," she said, "I wanted to thank you." For what? For speaking. For saying the words. For standing up when no one else would. I looked at her. She was nervous. Her hands were clasped behind her back, her posture rigid, her eyes flickering between mine and the floor. She reminded me of someone. Myself, perhaps. Before the chamber. Before the 3 words. "I did not speak for you," I said. "I spoke for my species. For my world. For the people who sent me here. If those words helped you, I am glad. But you do not owe me anything. You owe yourself the courage to speak your own words when your moment comes." She nodded. "I will." "I know," I said. And I walked away. That evening, I called home. My mother answered from the kitchen. I could hear the sounds of cooking behind her, the sizzle of oil, the clatter of pots, the low murmur of voices I did not recognize. Guests, perhaps. Family. The kind of gathering that had always happened without me since I took this role. "How is it going?" she asked. "The big important space meetings." "Different," I said. "Better, I think." "Are you eating?" "Yes, Mama. Proper food. The station's diplomatic mess has improved." She made a sound that meant she did not entirely believe me. "When are you coming home?" "Soon. The session ends tomorrow." "Good. I will make jollof. Save me some." She smiled. I could hear it in her voice. "Always." We talked for a while longer. About nothing important. About everything that mattered. When we hung up, I sat in my quarters and looked out the viewport at the stars. The station was in daylight cycle now, the thin ceiling glowing with the light of a distant sun. I thought about the delegate who had thanked me. She would find her own words. Her own 3 words. Not mine. Not anyone else's. Hers. And when she spoke them, the chamber would listen. Not because she was powerful. Because the chamber had been cracked open, and the light was getting in. That was the work. Not the votes. Not the proposals. Not the negotiations. The work was creating a space where every species could speak and be heard. The work was building a future that did not depend on any one person. Any one species. Any one moment. The coalition had learned to stand together. They did not need me anymore. That was the point. I leaned back in my chair. The stars were steady. The station hummed. Somewhere below me, in the reconfigured chamber, delegates were preparing for tomorrow's session. Arguing. Compromising. Learning. The Galactic Council had frozen when I spoke 3 words. We do not kneel. Not because the words were powerful. Because they were true. And when you speak the truth in a place that has been built on lies, the walls will crack. They had cracked. They were still cracking. And through the cracks, light. I closed my eyes. The ship was waiting. Home was waiting. The work would continue without me. That was the best possible outcome. I smiled. The stars held their light. And I went to sleep.